so happy for us. It just pretty homeworks the nonprofit organization with the mission to empower homeowners. We get our funding grants that still so if you find value in work, we encourage tonight's workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Jason, am I on? Hear me back on? All right. Good evening. Good evening. As previously mentioned, we're going to talk about frozen pipes. And if there are any questions, I would love to ask them. We have a few people in the audience today, so if they ask a question, I will certainly repeat it so that everyone at home can hear it also. So we'll kind of start right off the beginning here. Introduction. In the wintertime, that's when water freezes. Anything below 32 degrees, water freezes. And here in Michigan, that seems to be kind of hit and miss throughout the winter. We have really cold weather, and then it can be 50 degrees, and then get really cold again, and that kind of plays havoc with the water lines. And as water freezes, what usually causes the problem is that the water expands. Water is one of the few things that expand as it freezes. Most things contract. So if you have water in a pipe and it expands, and if the pipe is not strong enough, that will rupture and you get water leaks. Typically I've found, and there seems to be a lot of debate on this, like the urban legend is, it's always the hot water line that freezes first. There's a couple, it's kind of fun to look it up online, which does hot water freeze before cold? And the answer is yes, and then you check out another page and it says no. But one of the ideas is that as the water heater heats up the water, it removes a little bit of the air. It's water's H2O. So it removes a little bit of the air, and air is an insulator. So it has more of the hydrogen molecule in it. So it freezes. Whether that's true or not, like I said, if you look online, you'll get people that are like, oh yeah, the hot water freezes just because of that. There's actually scientific studies where they do all kinds of research to prove this one way or the other. In the end, it just seems in my experience, a lot of the water lines that freeze are the hot water lines. Yeah, maybe you can do some research on your own on that. But let's see. So we'll kind of flip to the next page here. Kind of follow right along. So why are frozen pipes dangerous? Well, I know they can be very costly. If you're not at your house and a water line freezes or ruptures, you're going to flood your house. One thing I always recommend, even in the summertime, if you're going to be gone away from your house, just shut your water off. That's something that every homeowner should know how to do, is shut your water off, just in case of an emergency. If you're in city water, the shut-off is going to be by the water meter, typically in the basement. If you go down into the basement, the water meter is almost always on the road or street side of your basement. It'll come through the side of the basement wall. Usually there's a city valve before the meter, and then there'll be a house valve after the meter. Sometimes there's two, but there always needs to be at least one. And it's not a bad idea to go in the basement and check that out, because if you've got water spraying because you have a frozen water pipe, you don't want to be guessing where that valve is at or if it even works. It's probably not a bad idea to give them a little shot of WD-40 too, to kind of make sure that they're going to work when you need them to. Let's see. So one of the big problems with frozen pipes is the water damage. Usually freezes in a cupboard or a cabinet or near an outside wall. Usually due to poor insulation or no insulation at all. Depending on the age of your house, sometimes insulation will settle and air will find a way to get into those pipes and freeze, especially when we get like the polar vortex or you get a storm. We've had a couple big winter storms here lately, and you get high winds. High winds will find a little, either a crack in the foundation or a little split in the siding, or even around a little gap in a window like in the basement, where the wind is able to blow through and get to those water lines and then freeze them. So I have a couple examples of here. Let's try that again. I have a couple examples of insulation here that are really easy to put on yourself. Make sure this is picked up by the camera. So this is just a foam insulation. You can get this pretty much. Ooh, we got the fancy camera on there. Very nice. All right, check that out. So we've got the fancy camera that's going to show us. So this is just foam insulation. You can pick this up at any box store. A lot of times there'll be tape or something on one side, so as you push it together, it sticks. Really handy because you just slide it on the pipe. Let me get back under the camera here. Slide it on the pipe, then you just pinch it together, and boom, you're done. You've just insulated the pipe. The one thing that you have to make sure of, though, is that you're not trying to just heat, insulate a pipe, even in the outside cold. There's got to be warmth around that insulation. You can't just run a cold water line, lay it on the ground, wrap some insulation around it, and expect it not to freeze. You're basically keeping this pipe insulated from the cold. So if it's in a spot that's not heated, it's still gonna freeze. The insulation is not gonna make a difference. So they've got the foam insulation. They actually make kind of a cool fiberglass wrap. This part here comes off, and then you just, almost like a candy cane, you wrap it around the pipe. That's okay. We'll leave it wrapped up. Otherwise, it'll go all over the place. But fiberglass insulation, this is pretty simple to use. Again, you put it on the pipe and you just wrap it just like a candy cane to keep the insulation wrapped to protect the pipe. Generally what you're doing is, if you have a pipe that freezes, it usually freezes when you get a polar vortex. You get wind out of like a different direction. So this is like protecting it temporarily. So you're just buying it some time to keep it from freezing. I think there's a great example here. Let's see if I can pull this up into the camera. So this is what, everything's backwards. There we go. So this is actually what a copper pipe looks like when it freezes. Remember when we said earlier that water expands as it freezes, and what happens is it'll eventually reach the breaking point of the copper, and it'll just rupture, and now you've got a little waterfall inside your house. And a lot of the things that freeze, since how we got the fancy camera going here, this is an outside faucet. This happens to be a really huge one, so it probably went through brick or block in a house just due to the length of it. But when you turn, you can see that shaft is spinning inside. And as you spin that shaft, from here, that shaft travels all the way down to the inside of your house where it's heated. And as you spin that handle, you're actually shutting the water off back here. The only part that fails with these is if you put a garden hose on this or leave a garden hose on it in the wintertime. What happens is that coiled up pipe will just work its way back up to here, and the ice inside that hose, I should say not pipe but the hose, will work its way back up in here. The ice will travel back to this part here where it's been soldered, so the copper's not as strong as it used to be, and it pops. The bad thing is you are not going to know that until the springtime when you hook that hose back up to go water your garden or wash your car. And when you do that, this split part will dump water into your basement. And odds are you'll be washing the car going, man, I've just got horrible water pressure That's because the balance of that water pressure is dumping into your basement.
Steve, can you make sure to show our in-house participants because they're not able to see what's on the screen right now.
Ah, okay.
We might want to
Sure.
take things around, let them.
Okay.
It's okay. You can be off screen.
All right, so I'm going to be off screen. So like I was showing here, see how that shaft turns like that? So it's actually shutting the water off way back in here. This is called a frost-free hose bib. And the reason being is that it actually shuts off. So say this is your exterior wall. This inside is heated. So it's going to be protected. I'll leave that there for show and tell. Oh, I've repaired some that have been 50 years. This is actually the brand I use. It's called Woodford. The brand is Woodford, and you can do a rebuild kit on it. So anytime I have a customer that's got one of those that might leak or it drips, I carry rebuild kits and I can change that out. Which if it's in a brick house or a stone wall, like the old school stone basement walls, that can be a real difficulty to change those out with a new one. But if it's a Woodford, I can rebuild it. So those are my favorite ones. You can pick those up at, I know Menards carries them, that specific brand. But the only weakness of them is leaving your hose hooked up. So if you have any hoses hooked up to your outside faucets, I want you to run home tonight and take those off, even in the dark, because it's supposed to be pretty cold tonight. There any questions? Okay. You're good? All right. So I guess if we could, can I get maybe move this so I can get a shot of, I want to kind of show the sink here. Jason's got us a handy dandy. Oh, I just asked if you wanted questions. Okay, I'm ready.
All right, you're talking about insulation
Yes.
and hot water lines freeze first.
Typically, yes.
I insulated all my hot water pipes.
Mm-hmm.
like, a long time ago,
Okay.
but I thought it was because hot pipes.
There is also that everyone's energy conscious nowadays. So again, back in the day, and I'm 52, so I can kind of say back in the day at least a little bit. No one can see you, so that's fine. So you're correct. Back in the day, they used to wrap water heaters in a fiberglass bag, basically, and that helped keep the heat in the water heater so it didn't have to turn on and bring the water up to temperature. It's the same thing with your hot water lines. If you wrap that hot water line, it's going to stay warmer longer when you use it. So instead of being ice cold, it might be tepid. So it might be like 80 degrees, 70 degrees. So you're saving energy by not having to reheat that water so much.
So if we're dealing with frozen pipes, you should insulate both pipes. Cold air.
We're kind of doing I wouldn't call it a worst case scenario, but if there's a potential to freeze, if you have a basement that's not heated, if you have an older Michigan basement where there's no heat source down there, maybe your furnace is upstairs. I kind of think this is more directed towards if there's going to be a freezing potential or you've had issues in the past. This is where you would want to insulate. So if you have a water line that froze in the past, insulating it would certainly protect it. What you did is, I'm assuming, is for energy. Okay, so you kind of took out two birds with one stone. By insulating it, you've protected it from freezing in case maybe a window pane in the basement gets knocked out and you've got cold air blasting on the water pipe. Or we get an ice storm and it takes out everyone's electricity and you don't have a furnace. And so you're just taking care of upstairs, right? You want to keep your upstairs warm. You're not really concerned about the basement, but that's where all your water lines are at. Does that answer your question?
Should I be insulating both
I guess my opinion is she's asking, she stated that she's already insulated the hot water pipe, and that was more for energy, because as you heat the hot water, your water lines are already warm, and so by insulating, they're going to stay warmer longer, so you're not using as much energy to heat your water lines. That also works in the benefit of keeping the pipes protected from freezing because they're insulated. So, and her other question was, should she insulate her cold water lines? I typically, unless they're in a spot where they're going to freeze, and again, that goes back to a Michigan basement, a basement that doesn't have heat, if it's got a lot of cracks in the foundation and you get wind blowing on them, then yes, I would do that to protect them. Otherwise, the only other reason I'm aware of is why you would insulate a cold water line is for condensation in the summer. If you have a non-conditioned space and you're using your outside faucet, your garden hose to water or wash your car, in Michigan, we know it gets pretty humid here sometimes, they'll condensate and they'll drip. And if it's in a finished basement, you don't want that ruining your drop-in ceiling or making marks on the carpet. You had a question, Jason?
What about in the crawl space?
Crawl space would be one I would insulate both of them. And if it's an unheated crawl space, heat tape. I think I talked to Jason earlier about this. Heat tape is something that I would consider. My folks live in a farmhouse out in the country, and they've got a really scary crawl space. And several years ago, my brother and I climbed under there, and we wrapped it with, there's a commercial grade of heat tape. It's just, it lasts a little bit longer. And we wrapped both hot and cold water lines, and then I insulated them in a blanket of fiberglass insulation to protect them. They have a crawl space and their water lines were always freezing. It was always a pain. So crawl space would be a great example for the fiberglass insulation that I showed earlier, and heat tape. Heat tape you can get at any of the box stores. It comes in like 10 feet, 20 feet, or you can actually get the industrial or the commercial grade stuff that you just snip the ends and put on an adapter that you can plug into an extension cord. That actually lasts a really long time, and that would be a great place to insulate your pipes, definitely in a crawl space. So kind of talking about sinks, again, when it's really cold outside, the sink, these don't have doors on them, just for showing what's going on underneath. But if this had doors on them and they're shut, and we're going back to the polar vortex, everyone remembers that, the cold air coming down from Canada, sub-zero temperatures for days or even a week on end. So this is a box. So the hot air is out here, and there's no heat source in this side. So if this is up like this, an outside wall, this would be a good example. This is an older home where they had the old paper insulation in there, and just over time it settles. So now there's gaps, or you have little chipmunks or mice or something that are in the walls, and they make a little opening in there, and then the cold air comes through. So one way to protect, and again, this is something that you'll usually find, you go to wash your hands, and again, the hot water side doesn't work. That's because something has frozen probably in here. So the easiest way to do that is when you know it's going to be super cold, just open up the doors. That way the heat can get back in there. And I think Kalamazoo, I don't know if they've done it this year, but in the past they've done freeze warnings with the water, and they ask you to turn your water on, and they want you to have like a pencil lead, like the old number 2 pencils, have that thickness of a stream of water coming out of the faucet. Now I can already see you're scowling because we're wasting water, but if it keeps the pipes from freezing, you're going to be farther ahead. She wanted to know, our audience member wanted to know if it's hot or cold. Both. You want to have just a trickle of hot and just a trickle of cold. you're going to come out farther ahead by having water moving. So, and it goes back to water moving doesn't freeze as easily, right? We've all seen the Kalamazoo River freeze. It's still moving underneath, but the top freezes. So having this on just a trickle, and you'll find it's usually like a kitchen sink or it's a sink that's on a side, prevailing winds coming in off of Lake Michigan, where that will freeze. So step one is if you know it's going to be really cold and you know you have a kitchen sink or a bathroom sink that freezes, or even a shower, right? The shower, you don't have anything to open, but you still can turn the water on a trickle. So open up the cupboard doors. That's a real inexpensive way to do it. And if you're still concerned, you can do a little trickle. And I don't remember the exact phrasing for the city of Kalamazoo, but they do say there's a frost warning on, turn your water on a trickle. Yes, ma'am.
If you are going to turn on a trickle,
Mm-hmm.
every faucet, or just one?
So the question is, how many faucets do you turn on? Which is a great question. Being a plumber, what I would do is, we'll do northeast, we'll do some directions here. So if the water meter is on the front of the house and you have a fixture that's at the back of the house, that would be the one you would turn on, because you're going to pull water all the way through the house to your last or farthest fixture away from the water meter, or even a well if you're out in the country. So whatever fixture is farthest away from that water meter. Does that make sense? But if they're, this is, you have to kind of pay attention and learn your house. If there is another one that it always has trouble, go ahead and turn that one on too. You're farther ahead by having just a trickle of water than having a pipe freeze and rupture in the basement. Because a lot of times you don't know that they've ruptured until it's too late. And we were talking before we went live, and someone talked about because of the cold temperature, they decided to stay home for safety. If you are going to leave, and I do this even if it's not cold outside. If I'm going to leave for a week to go camping or a couple weeks, if I'm leaving the house for an extended period of time, just shut your water off. Even if you have a well, it's as simple as walking over, flipping the breaker, shut the well off. If you're on city water, then we talked about the meters, shut the water off at the meter. The reason is I can't tell you how many times I've had customers that have had something blow apart, rupture, break, split, crack while they're gone. I've walked into homes where there's literally a waterfall coming down from the upstairs because something failed. And it would have been so simple to just shut your water off, and it would have saved a lot of headaches. Question in the back.
So I've got one of those thermostats that you can program remotely with your phone.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything like that where you could shut your water off remotely with your phone if you forget?
Yes, there is. I really can't tell you any details, but I have had a customer ask me about it, and I hooked it up, and it's basically an electronic valve. They actually make smart water heaters now that if it detects a leak or detects water, it shuts the water off to the water heater. The water heater will not work. They get zero hot water. They do make a solenoid valve. A solenoid valve is basically, instead of a manual valve, let me sneak off camera here. So you've got a valve like this that you turn off and turn on. They put one here that's got an electric motor that will do that, and you can run it off of your phone through Wi-Fi. I think it's kind of cool. So if you've got like a security system, I'm sure that'll interface with that. So that's pretty much it with this on the frozen pipes part. I think I might have to move the camera back around here again. I'm back. All right. Okay, so I think we covered why do pipes freeze, the gaps in the foundation, southern climates. Yeah, so I know it's been in the news the last few years about like Texas, the super cold weather that they've got. They are just not set up for cold weather. A lot of their water lines run in the attic. They'll be on slab, so there's no basement. So when that water line comes in and runs across the attic, it's insulated, but there they insulate for heat. So there's a good chance that the water lines are on top of the insulation. So it's water lines, insulation, and then the ceiling of your house. So when they get inclement weather like they did, they're not dialed in for that. So that's something I've run into a few times. Building new houses, customers want a shower, one of those big rain fancy shower heads that come up and over the top, up in the attic space. I try my best to talk them out of it, and if I can't, then we just need to make special precautions. And what I normally do with that, I might do some drawing today. So you've got your ceiling, and then you've got your what is it, 2x8, 2x10? Come on, Jason, you should know what this is. What's your roof trusses? All right, so we'll say they're two. All right, so we're gonna say they're 2x8. So this is a 2x8, 2x4. This is your ceiling, and this is going to be your big fancy shower head. And here's the wall. Here's your on and off, right? I have to explain what it is so you guys know. So the water line comes off the top of that for your shower head. And how are you going to get to here? So a lot of times what you do, you're not supposed to drill through these, so you've got to come all the way up top, come all the way over here, and then down. So insulation is to protect. So when you have a thermos and you've got hot chocolate in it, right? So you're keeping the cold out and the heat in. So it's the same kind of thing here. So we have heat is coming up, right? Heat rises. So a lot of, the customer goes, oh, we're just going to insulate this really well. Well, the only problem with that is you've now just insulated your hot water line from the heat source. So what you do is you want to put your insulation up here so that this is now, right? Can you tell that's insulation, or is that wave? It looks like waves on Lake Michigan. But right now your heat can come through the drywall and it'll hit this fiberglass insulation and stop. So now you've made this space here is heated or conditioned. So now you can get away with this and you won't have any problems with it. A lot of times, I'll throw this insulation down on top of it, and then they'll blow in insulation on top of it. So it's kind of like double protected. And that's how you can get away with running a water line up there. And like we were just talking about, frozen lines. So in Texas, they run their water lines up and then down. And when this is open to anything that's colder than 32 degrees, boom, they've got trouble. It splits, it ruptures, it freezes, and causes all kinds of trouble. And I think they even had trouble with city water rupturing because it's not designed for cold weather, unfortunately. The northern climates where we all live, exterior walls, like we just talked about, attics. Exterior walls is something that I struggle with all the time. If you have a shower, right, you've got your shower head and your shower valve, you don't want the shower valve in an exterior wall. If you do, again, you've got to take precautions to make sure that that's protected from the cold and that heat can get to it. I always try my best to, it's, the right hand, left hand. If the left hand is outside, let's move it to the right. A lot of times it's a closet, it's a hallway. usually when I get called out on a service call, right, it's the worst case scenario. Something's failed, it doesn't work, water spraying everywhere. That's typically because insulation has settled. Maybe they were outside pounding on the wall, putting on new siding, and that insulation sank. Or you go back to the dreaded rodents, your chipmunks and your mice, get in there and root around and make little nests, and when they ball it all up, now you've got an empty spot right to the outdoors. So attics, basements, we covered basements. One easy way is I love the Great Stuff expanding foam. If you've got a basement like I was saying, my folks have an older home and they've got the fieldstone basement walls. I mean, I don't know if you ever tried to drill through a rock that you took out of a field, but it's as hard as steel. It's really tough. It's twice as hard as concrete. It's really bad. So as those settle, you start to get the little cracks in the insulation. So that Great Stuff, I think they call it, expanding foam, that's awesome in the summertime. When you see those cracks, it comes with a little tube on it and a little hose. You stick those in the cracks and seal the cracks. I think there's two different kinds of foam. There's one that expands really big, and then there's another one they use around doors and windows and electrical outlets that doesn't double or triple in size, so it doesn't warp and trip things up. So underground, I think we talked about this a little earlier today, before the meeting. Water freezing underground. So you're supposed to have your water lines buried deep enough so that they don't freeze. I think it's like 60 inches. It's been a long time since I've run a water main, but I think it's 60 inches, so 5 feet deep, to be below the frost line. In wintertime, when there's no snow and you get the super cold weather, that cold just slowly creeps down into the ground, and it gets down to where the water lines are at, and they'll rupture, they'll freeze. One thing that I see a lot of is PVC mains will freeze. For some reason, when a sewer line leaves a house or leaves a place of business and goes and ties into the city sewer, if this goes underneath a driveway, I can't explain it. I don't know why, but cars driving over a driveway with a sewer line underneath it, the weight of the car just drives that frost down really, really far, and this will freeze. Typically, it doesn't freeze or it doesn't split because it's not like a water line where it's under pressure, but it will freeze and then it won't flow. And then you've got to call usually a drain cleaning company, and they'll have to jet it out with warm water or use their augers to clean it. When I worked for a local company, there was a car dealership that was having this kind of an issue with it, and we had to dig it up, and we ended up having to put styrofoam insulation over the top of the pipe and then backfill it with sand, and that took care of it because that insulation was thick enough where it stopped the cold penetrating the water line. So, making sure that they're buried deep enough is certainly something that needs to be addressed, especially if you're building a house or if you're remodeling the house. It's something to think about. That's another great question here. How do I know if my pipes are freezing? One sure way of knowing is water pressure will decrease. Like you go to your kitchen sink and you flip on the cold, you know what kind of water pressure you typically have. If you know it's less, or a good way of telling if it, for like 1 second or just a quick second, it's full pressure and then it drops down, it decreases. That means there's a frozen spot in your water line, so it's not letting the same amount of water flow through as if the ice wasn't there. I think they mentioned frost. So if you look at a pipe, and it's like if you go to your favorite place to get your frosty mug of root beer or beer, right? How they freeze the mugs and they're frosty. Your water lines, your copper water lines, like this, it would be frosty, and you'd be able to like scratch the frost off of it, and it would be ice. That means that it's freezing or it's already frozen. then you're kind of in, then you're starting to get in trouble. What you can do, I've also told customers, is an electric heater. You got to be safe with it, but if you put an electric heater, I had a customer, his laundry water had frozen, so he couldn't use his laundry sink, and he couldn't wash clothes because it was frozen or really cold. So I just had him, put an electric heater in that room. If you can, shut the door. Now you've got to use precautions, right? It's heat, so you don't want it aiming at anything flammable, but if you can just bring the temperature up in the heat, or in the basement, if you can maybe put that heater in the basement to raise the temperature down there, that'll certainly help. Reduce flow, I covered that. What can I do if a pipe is frozen? Act quickly. Yes, that is a big thing. So let's just see what we got here. If the water's still running through the pipe but is slowed because of freezing, turn on all nearby faucets to flush cold water out. So yes, if you turn on your kitchen faucet and you know that is decreased flow, don't turn it off. Let it run. And if you have a fixture that's further upstream, so again, we go back to if you at the front of the house, if that's where your kitchen is at, and that one's working great, but the laundry sink is maybe not, just get some water flowing through the pipes until that water pressure increases. That'll help melt the ice, because the water coming out of the ground is going to be 45, 50 degrees. So that'll make a big difference on that part that's trying to freeze. I think we talked about heaters. There's hair dryer. They recommend not using an open flame. That's probably a good idea, right? You don't want a flamethrower down in your house, catch your insulation on fire and burn your house down. Pipes won't freeze, but you don't have a place to live. I think I saw on here hair dryers. Hair dryers are great, or an electric heater. Sometimes just setting up a fan to move that air around a little bit, so you're moving warmer air into the space where you're having trouble with things freezing, like we talked about earlier. Open up the underneath the cabinet so you get some warmth in there. Sometimes just aiming a fan at it will move heated air from the house into the underneath the cabinet to kind of thaw things out. Crawl spaces, another thing is a hair dryer is a good thing. Fan is another good one if you're blowing house warmed air into the crawl space. That's certainly going to make a big difference too, to keep things from freezing even more. Because there can be, it's not a hard frost, right? We've all had slushies where it's not frozen solid. And if you can get to the pipe before it freezes solid, that's usually where you'll be able to save the copper pipe. Another thing I'd like to bring up too, just it's not on there, but PEX. So your copper, your galvanized, your CPVC pipe is really prone to freezing and splitting and rupturing. PEX is it's kind of newer on the market. I think they've got a couple different styles of PEX here. So they've got this one here. I think I was telling Jason earlier, this is your oxygen barrier. So this would actually be used for heating lines. So in-floor heat, this would be run like in concrete or fastened to the bottom of your wood floors, so it would heat the floor. But a lot of this style of pipe is put together through expansion. There's an expander that expands it, put a fitting in it, and it comes back down to shape. So PEX pipe, let's see if we can show one here. Yep, so Zern, this is a Zern. I think this is type A, so it's also expansion. What I mean by expansion is you have the pipe, and there's an expander that opens it up, and then you slide in a 90 or a T or something like that, and then the pipe has a memory, and it always tries to come back down. But the benefit of that is that it's expanded to be put together. So as it freezes, right? It's going to expand, but that's what it was designed to do. And as soon as it comes back up to temperature again, the ice is going to melt, and then that pipe will come back down to its normal size. Not many homes are being built or installed with copper pipe anymore. Pretty much everything is some version of PEX. It's easier to go together. It's not as expensive as copper, and I think it's a little tougher. Like this pipe here, I could run over this with my work van, and I could put it together, and it'd work just great. If I did that with copper, right? All I did is make a coin. I just smashed it flat. It's no good anymore. All right, let's see what else we got here. Okay, yeah, so if gently warming it with a hairdryer doesn't work, or a fan, or an electric heater, probably what you're going to have to do, and especially if you have copper or galvanized water pipes, is you're probably going to need to call a plumber. Because plumbers have, I don't know exactly what they call it, but it looks like jumper cables. And there's an electrical box, and they clip on either side of where they think the water froze, and it runs electricity through there, and literally, boom, that fast, it'll thaw it right out. With most stuff being made with PEX nowadays, I don't even know if they offer that option anymore. But back in the day, when it was wintertime, we used to carry those boxes around in our van. They literally would have a 50-foot lead on one side, so you could go and clip it on, and then clip it on at the other end, and it ran. It's not like if you touched the pipe you would get electrocuted, but somehow it ran some form of current through there, and it would heat the pipe up like immediately. It was pretty cool. And a lot of times, if you did that soon enough, it would save your pipe from rupturing, which is really expensive. Which I think leads right into the next one. How much does it cost to repair a frozen pipe? It can be not a whole lot, or it can be a ton because you've got to move out and live in an apartment or in a hotel while your house is put back together again. So I use the example of one of the customers I've had in the past. He called me up and said, "Hey, we've got some frozen pipe." Well, we showed up and we couldn't get in the front door, and we had to break in through the garage door because while he was on vacation, his upstairs water line had frozen because we'd had an ice storm and it took out the furnace. And when the power came back on, the furnace didn't. So the cold was the upstairs first. So the toilet line that goes to the tank froze, and then the sink froze, and then the shower froze. So there literally was a cascading stream coming down the steps. They ended up having to gut that house from 4 feet in the upstairs, 4 feet high, all the way down. I mean, they literally took all the drywalling, all the cabinets, all the flooring, carpentry. They took everything out. And he told me that they were only a few $1,000s away from the insurance company condemning the house because it would have cost more to fix it than it would be to tear it down and start again. So the cost can be, you've got a ruptured pipe and it's squirting water in the basement, to, oh my gosh, I think we may have to buy a new house. So the cost can be huge. That was why my suggestion was, if you're going to leave and you know it's going to be sub-zero temperatures or the polar vortex or anything like that, just shut your water off. Goodness sakes, it's so simple to do it. You just go down by the water meter, spin the valve, and turn on whatever the lowest faucet is. If you have a bathroom in the basement, just turn it on, turn one upstairs on, and just let your house drain. It's so much cheaper than having to come back and redo everything. So that's, like worst case scenario, like I mentioned before, if you can catch it and it's just frosting, put a little heat on it, right? That's not a lot of expense. You can thaw that pipe out pretty quickly. Now you're going to protect it by insulating it, or every time it gets cold, open up the doors to underneath the cabinet so that it's warm. Yeah, Yeah, the big thing is insurance companies. Sometimes they cover that, sometimes they don't. Um, it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of a catch-22. So a little precaution is always good. So we're back to what can I do to prevent frozen water pipes? So we kind of covered the insulating it. Insulating is certainly the very cost-effective, super easy. Anybody can go to one of the box stores, buy some of the insulation. It comes in 1/2 inch and 3/4. Those are the two sizes that are most common in a house. Even if it's galvanized or copper, it's either 1/2 inch or it's 3/4. There really isn't any other mystery sizes. Insulating is super easy, super inexpensive. Anybody can do it. A lot of times, all you need is a pair of scissors or a utility knife to cut it to length. Just insulate it. The other thing is we talked about opening cabinets. If you little preventive maintenance, if you have a window that's knocked out in your basement, like one of those little windows that basically they're only meant for letting light in. If one of those are out, even if you just get a piece of plastic or cut a piece of cardboard or just something to stop the wind from coming in. The great stuff, the expanding foam is awesome. You can fill up pretty decent sized holes with that, even if you just like stuff it with paper towel and then expand the foam around it. Any cracks around the windows in the basement, cracks in the foundation. If you've got an old Michigan basement and it's got like the cellar doors that flip open, flip down, a lot of times those will have another door that's on the inside. Plastic, you plastic off your windows, plastic off a door in the basement if you're not going to use it. Anything to keep the outside wind from coming inside. That's usually the problem, is you get the wind coming through. Lack of insulation, that might be a little more costly of an item if the insulation settles in the walls. I know there are companies out there that will come back and reblow insulation in. I think I saw something online where they look, some of the old homes that have it's not the vinyl siding, but the wood siding look, and you'll see all these little holes along the side. That's where they've drilled and injected foam in there, or blow in the cellulose or the fiberglass insulation. Insulation is big for keeping things from freezing. Opening up cabinets, kind of not a last resort, but certainly something. If you like in the middle of winter, you can't run around and insulate stuff. It's not too late, but that time has passed. Leaving on a faucet. If you have a faucet and you'll know, sometimes you walk up to a faucet and you'll turn it on and the water will be like ice water, like it's just had ice. Feels like it has ice cubes in it. That should be a warning sign. We're like, hey, something's going on there. The wind was blowing from a direction that doesn't normally blow from, and that was when you would want to start leaving that cabinet open, and then maybe research in the summertime when it's not so cold out is why. Is it lack of insulation, cracks in the siding, a window out downstairs in the basement? Just kind of be familiar with your house if something's kind of acts strange like that. Electrical, the heat tape is certainly a great way to do it. Again, it's really simple. It's certainly a do-it-yourself. It comes in spools. All it needs is to be plugged in. Unplug it in the summer. That'll keep things from freezing, especially in the crawl space. I think you had mentioned the crawl spaces. It's super important to protect that. And some of even the fancy heat tapes will turn on and turn off. It has a built-in thermostat, so you don't even have to think about it. It does it automatically, which is nice. Let's see. Weatherizing to limit cold from entering the home. I think we talked about that. Looking for cracks, seals, small holes, anything that shouldn't be there. That'll also keep little critters like the stink bugs and the ladybugs or any of the stuff you see really start to, like, how in the world did I get all these in my house? Somewhere there in that vicinity, there's a crack or an opening, whether it's around a window or a door. Yeah, and that there's always the option of, if you have any questions, there are professionals out there that they specialize in giving tips. Paying someone to climb into a crawl space, which is no fun, trust me, but it's better them than you, right? It looks like there's a bunch of resources on here. Looks like This Old House. That's a great one. Isn't that Bob Vila, right? Yep. This Old House, and YouTube is a great source of information. I've used YouTube many times in the plumbing world. You take something apart and you're like, oh, something went flying. What was it? I don't even know what I'm looking for. But any of this, you can Google foam insulation. It'll show you how to do it. Heat tape, if you want to see someone show you how to put heat tape on, it's on there. YouTube is a great source. Any other questions?
If there's another a blizzard like we had a few weeks ago here, and there's the danger of real cold weather and the danger of power outages, how would you suggest dealing with that for keeping your pipes from freezing? Just turn it off and try to drain it, or try to do something else, because your furnace is going to be off. You can't run a space heater. You can't even run your hair dryer.
Yep, that's a great question. So my suggestion would be, and of course this depends, if you are on city water, the city almost always maintains water pressure. They have generators. So then it goes back, that goes back to turning your faucet on a little bit to protect your house. If you don't have electricity, your options are really limited. Insulation, in a week or so is not going to make any difference, because it's just going to be cold everywhere on inside and outside the insulation. So I would go back to let the water flow, let the water just run, and that would be hot and cold. And I would turn just the pencil, so just like a 16th inch diameter, just let water flow through several fixtures to keep water moving. Typically when water is moving, it doesn't freeze as easily as still water does. So power outage, turn the water on. That would probably be your only option, short of like a kerosene heater or some kind of a secondary form of heat. I guess a lot of times natural gas is still on. So if you have a standard vent water heater without the blower on top, you're going to have hot water. So, and if you're out in the country, pray. I mean, you're probably left with, if you have a fireplace, get a fire going, get some fans so you're moving some heat around. No, that won't work because there's no power. I guess just heat. Get some. I mean, when I was a kid, we had kerosene heaters, and we used kerosene heaters. We even had one time we got out the old Coleman stove, right? The little propane tanks, and we had a well pit in our back room, and we had a 100-watt bulb that just was down there all winter long. So we opened it up, boxed it off so no one went careening down into the well pit, and then just put our Coleman stove down there with a burner on to keep it heated. But yeah, you got to be a little imaginative, because with no power, I mean, our society runs on electricity. Everything's electricity, one way or another. Any other questions? Oh, we're putting her on the spot.
So when we were just talking about if the power was to go out, would it be beneficial to find the smallest room in the house that doesn't have any windows and burn a candle? Would that generate heat?
Oh, now you're pulling off of YouTube. I've seen that. Well, it's fun. It's interesting you say that, because I have seen online where they're talking about the little decorative candles. They have they're in the little aluminum tin, and you put them in like under the little ceramic Christmas tree, and it glows. And they're saying you put a clay pot over that for a flower, and you put a couple of those in there, and it'll radiate heat. It goes back to what water freezes first, cold or hot. Some people go, oh my gosh, this brought my temperature of my room up by 5 degrees or something, and other people are like, really? A tiny candle? So it wouldn't hurt, right? Fire is heat. I don't know how that would do for keeping your pipes freezing, but it certainly would keep you a little warmer, right?
But it wouldn't. That kind of heat wouldn't be enough heat to generate.
No.
Nope. So if you're
No.
stuck in the house with frozen pipes, you're just kind of stuck in there.
Well, I would certainly take precautions. There's always the option, like Jason brought up earlier, if you don't have a heat source, you're not going to have a heat source. You don't have electricity, and you're afraid things are going to freeze. Then, as a last resort, and you're in the country, so you're on a well. That's when I would drain things down. I would go to the lowest point in your house, turn on the lowest fixture, and then go around the house and turn everything on. I'd probably flush the toilet. In the tank is the tank and the bowl are the most important parts. You want to keep those from freezing. So whether you have antifreeze, maybe put some salt in there because salt water freezes at a colder temperature than fresh water. So I mean, you'd have to get kind of imaginative if you're gonna like when I winterize a cottage and I know no one's gonna be there, and city's got to come and disconnect the water at the street. I have to pull the water meter off the wall, lay it on the ground, make sure I drain it. Go upstairs, turn on all the fixtures, drain everything out, drain the water heater, hook an air compressor up, usually to the drain of the water heater, and then blow air through the whole house. So it's not as simple as running through and just shutting off some valves and drain it. But if they're saying, we're not going to have power for weeks, then I would drain everything that you possibly can. Drain it out of to protect your water heater, to protect your dishwasher, right? To protect everything. But I don't really think that's going to happen. I mean, we've had some pretty bad storms come through, and within several days or a couple days, they've had power back on. And there's always the option. There's people that are I think most of us have an electric heater or a secondary, even if it's the one you put down to keep your toes warm while you're watching. Jason's watching Price is Right, right? He's got the little electric heater under there. So there's always a second or a third form of heat. If you're in the city, right, you're going to have if you have natural gas, water and natural gas, the city is going to maintain that. So if you have a gas stove, there's a chance that you can light the pilot and get it to start. I mean, a lot of them now have the automatic pilot, so that might not work. But to have everything go deep freeze is, right, knock on wood, I hope we never have to experience that, especially living in the city like we do. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, perfect.
Well, we have learned a tremendous amount about how to avoid frozen pipes. We hope that you all have learned a tremendous amount as well. Wanted to take the opportunity to invite you into our space at 812 Bryant on a Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. We'd love to see you we'd love to see your face in the space. And